Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Even though October is called Domestic Violence Awareness Month, statistics tell us that domestic violence is a daily occurrence. 3 women are killed every day by their current or former partner. Sally MacNichol and Quentin Walcott are the co-executive directors of Connect, an organization that works to prevent interpersonal violence. They're remarkable advocates and educators who've devoted years to eliminating violence that too often destroys families and communities. And they're my guests today. Welcome.
Thank you for having us, Ronnie.
So with all these recent things happening, do you think that domestic violence, people are finally beginning to understand how pervasive it is? Do you think that it's broken through any barrier, anything, any change?
I think, change is a process. I think the recent events of the NFL in relationship to domestic violence has really helped our cause, on the backs of someone who was, harmed and, was a victim of violence and survived violence. So we, for us, it's an opportunity to kind of shape some of the misinformation that goes on in communities and society on domestic violence and using the domestic violence situation as a way of doing that.
What goes on in communities that you say is misinformation?
Well, I think even just in the domestic violence case in the NFL, in terms of looking at the victim survivor of the violence as the cause for the violence happening. So
and is that, you find that really in communities?
That's very prevalent across the media, across communities, the victim blaming, which is pretty across the board.
You mean your neighbor really thinks that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a tendency, there's a subtle version of it, which is that she allowed that. Then the next sort of layer up is that she provoked that. And then the next layer is that she just deserves that. Oh. I mean, so the focus is just centered on the victim, even in as much as the victim is the one who's supposed to do something about it without any of us helping her.
And that it affects the victim because a lot of the women then, or the victim, believe that they really were the cause of it, right?
Absolutely. And then there's
so they wait for the next time.
I mean, sometimes it's like, eventually that's how violence works. Domestic violence and intimate partner violence works, is that eventually if you hear something is your fault long enough, that's the emotional, psychological abuse. You tend to think that, maybe it was my fault. You start to question yourself. And then there's this notion of, why does she stay in this situation that we get from the community? Right. So rather than asking the questions, why does the person abuse, we always the first question that's asked is, why does she stay? She must like this, she provoked it, rather than looking at the root cause of the violence.
The NFL, that provoked the whole Twitter thing, didn't it?
Yes.
Did it say why, hashtag why I stayed, why I didn't stay?
Right, and a very powerful one of that was, I stayed for my son so he could have a father. I left so my son could have a mother. And that, I thought that summed up, that was pretty powerful. But just a little bit back to the misconceptions, I think another one is that the event, like we just saw Janae Rice being, slugged in the elevator, but what people don't understand is all the things that have gone around, along and around that situation. So it's not just an event. People think of domestic violence as an event, but it's really a chronic condition of control and power where someone's really manipulated all the time. You don't have to hit somebody to control them. Right. They can just be afraid, intimidated, you can threaten them. You know their vulnerabilities. If you're in an intimate relationship, you know their vulnerabilities. And so we just think of it as an event, and of course the law looks at it that way too. So we're not looking at the other kinds and forms of violence.
So that's the only thing you can actually file a complaint and charge somebody with a crime.
Yeah, that's the issue with domestic violence, and the physical nature of it is that it leaves a mark, it leaves a bruise. So when you go into a family court and trying to get order of protection, and you talk about, well, my wife or my husband or my significant other, threatened me or said that they would do something to me, it's hard to get past the clerk on that. But if you have a black eye and a bruise, people kind of recognize that and associate that with being domestic violence, when really physical violence is only one piece of this whole dynamic of gaining and maintaining power and control in a relationship.
So this all makes it much more difficult
Yes.
than to combat it or end it or something like that. So you guys, you've been doing it, Sally, for 20 years,
30.
30 years. And you've been training people. You've been counseling batterers. You work with faith-based organizations a lot. What is a faith-based? Why is that important?
Well, in 2003, connected a survey in Brooklyn, Central Queens, South Bronx. We surveyed about 500 people. We did a lot of focus groups. And we asked people, you know, where would they go? Do they know the resources? Would they call the police? And one thing that was consistent across the board was that they really wanted to call their faith leaders. They wanted, and we can imagine that, you know, if you're, especially if you're coming from another country and you've just come here, or you're in a community that's surveilled a lot and is marginalized and doesn't feel like they can get justice from the police, you're going to want to go to that place that's home for you, and that's your faith. So, but we also found out that often, and faith leaders aren't educated about domestic violence. There's some theological misconceptions. There are just different ideas that don't help that process. So that's why we do it.
There was an illustration of that at Senate hearings on sexual harassment in the military, when a woman reported that she was raped and nobody paid attention, and she went to the chaplain and he said something about, well, that's what God intended.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So that shows
Yes,
you
that was just, So that's an example of just egregious, awful, bad theology and bad spiritual counseling. And just the idea that, again, the victim blaming that we were talking about, that's unfortunately in many of our faith traditions, women are not equal sacred partners with men, and they are, I mean, Eve, they are the ones who caused the problem. And that is very deep in many of, particularly from my own knowledge, Abrahamic religions. You know.
And you also trained social workers to identify when there was child abuse, to look for the domestic violence.
The child welfare.
Child welfare agency and everything.
Yes, done a lot of that.
And Q, you've been 18 years with men?
Yes, working with men and also families around domestic violence, but my entry point was working with men and boys.
And so what do you do? They have to be retaught? Is it part of just being a boy or a man?
Yeah, I mean, it has a lot to do with how we're socialized and to be men. So part of it is that, and you know, how we view masculinity and the different types of masculinity, particularly the unhealthy forms that contribute to, you know, the idea that men and women are that men and boys are justified in their thinking, right? Because it's really about the thinking, the way we think about women and girls to behave in a particular type of way. And so I think, you know, for us, it was really important that we engage men and boys, so we're not just being reactionary in a sense that we're looking at the victim survivor as the starting point, but then we're really looking at who's doing the violence and what are some of the root causes of violence. So for us, it was really like, you know, looking at and examining how we think, what are our notions of manhood, where do we get this idea of who we are to be in relationships. So it was really unpacking a lot of that, you know, teaching critical thinking, using, you know, understanding what power and control is and the impact of our thinking and our behavior on the people that we're in relationships with.
How do you all get these people to come to your sessions?
Well, you know, we've been doing the work for quite a long time.
So
we have, you know, over 200 community partners. So, I mean, a lot of it is word of mouth at this point. But we still do, you know.
When you say community partner, you mean groups that are from a community that know of your existence?
Yeah, we're a citywide organization. We started in Brooklyn and in the Bronx and Queens, and then we became a citywide organization. So we have 200 and more partners all over the city that, you know, so they invite their staff or their community organizers to come to our trainings. So we train them. So we teach social work students, people who are, you know, interested in different communities that may see more domestic violence than we do as a DV organization, because most of it goes unreported. So we're really trying to really build the capacity of people in communities to address this, not necessarily to be social workers, but to kind of really take this on as if they're dealing with another social justice issue or a health issue, to maybe look at domestic violence as part of it or a root cause of whatever issue they may be working
So when you're men's roundtable, it isn't actually men who are abusers?
No, I mean, but they are, some of the men are,
Yeah.
right? Some of the men are, but the idea was to have a safe space for men who work with men and boys to have these conversations. But, in that setting, we have an intergenerational group, interracial group. We have men who
Gay and
recognize that they do have privilege, right?
Yeah.
They have entitlement. So I think that's the one thing that's common with someone who is abusive in a relationship and someone who is not, is that we're socialized the same way. So we can either cross that line at any time, in any moment. So we're having these conversations with men who are working with men. It's really about themselves as well, because it really becomes about talking about your own experiences and how do you decipher the violence that was around you and making connections between intimate partner
That's
violence
important, isn't it?
and other forms of violence as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
You wanted to say something?
Well, just that these, the trainings and the roundtables and the circles provide, I mean, in a way, it's going back to the very early days of the domestic violence movement, which is break the silence, tell your story in a safe space, and then you hear other people telling their stories for the men and the women, and we have community dialogues where we speak together and make those connections. Hearing another person's experience can illuminate your own, and then coming together, you start to think of other ways that you can counter the violence around you. So it's a good, open, safe space for people, and it engenders a lot of creativity.
When you talk about the violence around you, sometimes it's the violence that you grew up with in your own household.
Yes.
Yeah, it could be,
Don't figures show that that's a very common inherited trait?
well, not inherited, but I think it makes you more.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's-
exactly.
It's not innate, but you've seen it. so
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
think
The more you
you
see
think
it-
it's a proper role.
Right.
That's right. The more you see it around you, the more likely that you'll be a victim or an
Right.
abuser of violence if you see it in a household. And also, if you see violence in a home, it's connected to other forms of community
Right.
violence as well, like gun and gang violence. You're more apt to be,
Mm-hmm.
getting from what you're not getting at home, you're getting from the community
Mm-hmm.
that at different costs. Like, members who are part of gang leaders say the same things as Sally and I say as human service workers. Are you hungry? Do you need a place to stay? Do you need money in your pocket? But at a different cost, when you get involved with gun and gang violence.
I thought when the football player,
Ray Rice.
that's the one with the son?
Oh,
Adrian
Adrian Peterson.
Yeah.
Didn't you wonder whether that's how he was treated when he was a boy?
And he was.
He was.
He was.
Yeah.
I believe that his mother defended him and said, "This is how I raised him." And so
Culture, as a
that's
cultural thing.
That's
That
a
was-
really hard and deep issue that we need to get
Yes.
at more.
I thought that was
yes.
really the point of that story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it is so important because you don't learn that you're supposed to hit your kid that
That's
way.
right. That's right.
No.
You learn it from what happened to you.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
learn that that's how you discipline children, and you make them.
Yeah.
But we have to find some good ways of speaking about this on a broad national level, I believe, and because there's a new book out about studying discipline and spanking, and it's a huge study. It's called Primal Violence, and it's by this guy Richard Gellis, I think, who did early domestic violence studies. And it's pretty clear that a vast majority of people believe that physical corporal punishment is something that you need to include in child discipline.
Yeah.
And that if you don't, and there's, it's different in different cultures and they're different historical, but it's pretty much across all cultures people believe this is how you get children to do things. And then of course that's,
It's passed along. It's a pass along.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
pass along.
Yeah.
And there's a
promoted.
correlation,
Yeah.
when we first started our work at Connect, and I work with the child welfare system, I was looking at child abuse and neglect and how where there were cases of child abuse and neglect, there was also cases of domestic violence, almost up to 80% of the
Yeah.
cases. So there's a correlation between the two. And I remember, just in some of our trainings over the years, we talk about child abuse and how it relates to domestic violence. People would say, there's nothing wrong with that. I turned out okay. And I would always kind of like, could we have been better without the child
Yeah.
abuse in our
Yeah.
lives?
Yeah.
And so it's really like a perspective that we have to really break down for people.
Is it all? It's all about power.
Power and control and a pattern of it. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think that with the child abuse too and the discipline is that what happens is you learn to conflate violence and love, because that's the person you love, and the one who's caring for you and offering you safety, and they're also hurting you. So you start to put those two things
They're
together.
doing it for your benefit.
Yeah,
that
and
idea of
so
love hurts.
yeah, that love hurts, and that sometimes it just has to be like that. So it really has a huge effect on
And not infrequently,
adult
the
life.
father is doing the same thing to the mother.
yes,
Yeah, absolutely. And then,
50 to 70%.
Yeah. I remember
Overlap.
one of the hearings we had at Bedford Hills with
Yes.
women who were incarcerated because they killed their abusers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That some of them said, I just thought that's what happens in a marriage. I watched my father do that to my mother.
That's right.
So that's what I assumed was going to happen.
Yeah, it becomes normalized behavior and normalized
how do we do
trauma,
that?
really,
Yeah. Now, that kind of relates to all the stuff going on at campuses on rape.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What is that?
Well, I mean, just the fact that 23 young women at Columbia University had to file a complaint because they could not get any response to the fact that they were raped is just outrageous.
military.
It's like the military.
Yes.
I mean, so in other words, we protect those who abuse, and in a place like Columbia, we protect it. In many other schools, people are much more concerned about the people who have done the abusing and the raping and what's going to happen to them, and they don't think about the women's lives. And it's pretty.
And the reputation of the
yes,
school.
and so they're just closing ranks around this, and absolutely no regard for the suffering of the
So
women.
are you training administrators in school?
Well,
Well,
I mean,
we do work with youth organizations on campus. At Columbia, ironically, the night before that lawsuit came out, there was an event where I was reaching out to male administrators and male students around, how can we really, develop appropriate responses. And what's important about just like domestic violence and sexual violence is that men are committing most of the violence. So we have to really spend some time and energy in a way of not just protecting men and young men who are committing these forms of violence, but really holding them accountable in a way that one looks at the safety of the victim survivor, and then also does that attitude change and shift work that I was talking about in terms of what we do at Connect with men, is really changing these attitudes and belief systems of these young men so that they behave in a particular type of way that sees women as equal partners in society, human beings at the very least.
Yeah.
So it's important to really focus some of those energies on really intervention and prevention work with men on campus.
And that shows also how related it is to alcoholism and
Absolutely.
and drugs, I guess.
Absolutely.
Almost more, it seems, to alcoholism, isn't it? I don't know. The
Yeah.
college drinking is
Yeah.
sort of out of control.
Yeah, it's out of control.
Yeah.
But I mean, we have to change the attitudes of the young men, but that also includes the administrators and the,
And-
if
and
this
awareness
was
of the
not
young
allowed, it wouldn't happen.
But even the awareness of the young women,
Yeah.
don't you have
but,
to?
Well,
really-
I think we do, but I think
Yeah.
the focus should be
Be on the men.
on the young men, and if the administration
way it's
said,
handled.
if this happens, you are kicked out of school, period, the end, I'm telling you it would be less.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we'd collude as a society, or it wouldn't be this level.
Yeah. Well,
We don't collude with drunk driving anymore.
No.
You
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. And even smoking.
And smoking.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's just talk for a minute about Connect, because we're getting
Mm-hmm.
sort of the end.
Okay.
It's an organization that, what? People, an individual like me, not like me, but like
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't do this, they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely, and they could participate in some of our roundtables. They could come to the men's roundtable, women's circle, faith roundtable. They could come to some of our trainings and workshops on different topics. They could access our legal advocacy program that has a helpline that would help them negotiate these systems, because the systems are tough. They're tough to deal with.
Very hard.
They're not necessarily, it's not a cookie cutter approach. You just don't say get an order of protection, go to a shelter. I was just at a meeting and hearing about that now at shelters, they want every shelter member to come in and report through a phone. They have to call a number. HRA wants this. There's a lot of in other words, without going into that, it's a big policy issue, but there's a lot that's punitive about the system and re-victimizes. So we are really about preventing that and helping people negotiate.
It discourages people to
Yes.
go, and that gets
Yeah.
the word out. But you're also interested in spreading the word.
Absolutely.
Educating people
Oh,
into
yes.
communities.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if somebody is in a community, should also be, if they could come and help you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can
absolutely.
reach.
To talk about all these organizations that you're affiliated with, isn't it now, it's so much more complicated than it was 10 or 20 years ago with all the different cultures that we now
Yeah,
have with the
yeah.
immigration?
So that's one of our specialties at Connect, is
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
looking at immigrant communities and really speaking a language that they can understand, literally through
Yeah.
having some of our staff members speak the languages, or we train someone from that community to be a resource, so that one, they deal with the cultural needs and the language needs, and really have a truly understanding of what that particular community needs. So we provide technical assistance and support, and we train 600 people a year to either do work with men, women, or children who witness violence, and many things in between as well. And we have our Connect Faith program. We have partnerships with faith institutions, and like Sally will go in and work with, one, help develop policies and sermons, and then also working with not just the women's ministries or the health ministries. I'll come in, or some of our staff will work with the men's ministries, because we see domestic violence as it's a men's issue. It's a community issue as well. So we're really trying to dispel this myth that domestic violence means that it's a women's issue or it's just about physical violence. So we're really breaking that myth. And even in terms of us being leaders of Connect as co-leaders and looking at really demonstrating how men and women can work together in communities.
Very the
So
core
that's
of your
very important.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
this national dialogue, you think it's going to fade again?
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think with
I-
any issue like this, there's a very short attention span.
Right.
But our job, doing this work every single day, is to really kind of make sure that communities understand the true and full dynamics and complexities of domestic violence on an everyday basis, and how what's happening in an intimate relationship is so much related to what's happening on a community level and structural level. So if we, many things need to be done, but we kind of, through the spaces that we provide at Connect, and having roundtables, discussions, and trainings, really creating spaces to keep this dialogue continuing to go.
And I think people get a sense of hope also, because a lot of people think, oh, it's just like this. It's always going to be like this. But
Yeah.
we try to project the fact that each one of us can change and we can make a difference, and it doesn't have to be this way.
The NFL really showed also how important the employers are.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So have you found that more companies
Yeah,
are
that-
interested in training?
Yeah,
their
that's another
employees,
piece
or
of our work that we didn't mention
Yeah.
thus far, is that we have relationships where we work with unions and corporations to look at domestic violence, workplace violence, and bullying behavior. Because at the core of all three of those things is power and control, right? Depends on, if it's in one-on-one, is a group of people to one, but it is an issue. And so we've been doing that work. So hopefully, because of what's happening with the NFL, the NBA is looking at their policy now. But, in terms of like Verizon to the MTA to all the different types of industries, really need to take this on and be serious about it. Retail as well.
That's because they lose a lot of money, don't they?
That's right.
With employees who can't come to work or do
That's
things
right.
like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the motivation for corporations, is
It's always
the
the
bottom
bottom
line,
line.
the dollar.
Yeah.
So that's why
Sadly.
when we approach this work, we like to look at unions who are really worried about the individual employee, and then the corporations. But we have these alliances that are working between corporations and unions and community-based organizations like Connect, and we're collaborating together to really develop appropriate responses and look at prevention.
So all of you sort of are in contact with each other. I mean, the women in the military, right? The college campus things, your kind of thing. It is when you put it together, it is a very wide national coalition, isn't it?
Yeah,
It is.
Yeah.
falls under this umbrella
Yeah,
of
I
gender
mean-
justice or
Right.
gender violence,
Yeah.
right?
So
we're
how do we
part of it.
ever end it at the beginning? We always talk about this, years ago, it was that non-sexist education.
Yeah.
It's parenting, isn't it?
It's I mean,
It's even before
absolutely.
child is
Well,
born.
actually, it's a commitment to nonviolence in parenting.
It's hard
in
to
your
do it
life,
in a world
and it is.
that has wars
That's the problem.
and
it's very difficult.
violent games.
Where we really believe that violence is the solution to most of our problems. But if you can commit to nonviolence in your community, in your family, in your community, and really look at other human beings as equal,
But you don't want to
and
say that you're
respectful.
all pacifists.
But it's not, nonviolence isn't pacifism. that's a whole other discussion. Nonviolence, it's just, and we think of nonviolence in these large movement ways, but in terms of relationships, you know, and how we deal with other people, having respect for other people, being able to hear other opinions, taking the time to work through conflict, and understanding that conflict is part of human interaction, but instead of saying, okay, we're just going to, you know, do something physical to end this, to really learn those skills. And we don't have a lot of skills for that.
No, we certainly don't.
And we don't,
Just have to
because
look
we
at the
don't
Congress.
promote them. We
Politics.
don't, you know, we don't
Right.
promote them. It's one of the things that
Yeah.
you do in schools.
Exactly.
I
And
think,
the easy way out is to be violent. You know, let's kind of
That's
sit
easy.
back a little bit more and
So
kind of
we need more
negotiate.
discussion about the future.
Absolutely. Discussion in
Absolutely.
action in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah.
We're not just talking. We're really
Engagement.
engaging.
Yeah,
Right.
engagement with
And-
different ideas, you know, that are out of the box.
Right.
you know,
Respect
right.
for each other.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty basic idea,
Use
but
of
it's
power.
not
Yeah,
exactly. The abuse of power, respect, mutuality,
Exactly.
equality.
And at the same time, you have to strengthen the people who are being abused.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you have to convince the people who are abusing not to
Yeah.
do it.
That's right.
It's an incredible balancing act, isn't it?
It's quite a lot.
And those children who are witnessing that, we want to really interrupt those
Yeah.
cycles of violence with them as
Yeah.
well, because you know, children like sponges; they take in everything around them.
Yeah.
So
Do you do any work in prisons?
yeah, I've done some work in prisons, and we do work with reentry programs
Mm-hmm.
as
Yeah,
well.
some
So,
reentry.
yeah.
So how many years now have you been in existence?
Well, as Connect,
12 years.
since 13 now,
Yeah.
or 12.
It'll be 12 years.
It'll be 12 years, and then, you know, we were previous
Earlier,
to that.
yeah.
Yeah, but
And you,
Yes.
what?
it's been a while.
It is. You have a website,
Yes, we have a website.
connectnyc.org.
.org. We're on Facebook and we're on Twitter.
Facebook. And we welcome all and any inquiries and engagement, and just come
And support.
and
Absolutely.
support. Yes, we could really use support.
And Ronnie, if I can I just say the legal helpline number?
Yeah.
This is
Yes.
212-683-0605.
And especially helpful also with immigration
Absolutely.
questions.
Yeah, if you're
Yeah.
someone who doesn't have papers, or, you know, and you're being abused, there are remedies for you. You're not stuck.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know what we do with people like you who work for a peaceful world and mutual respect and dignity for people. It's just amazing. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.